Okay. Good morning. The 10th session of the Conference of the States Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities got underway today. This is the body that brings together governments and civil society organizations to ensure the full implementation of the convention. 173 countries have joined the convention to date, and the theme of this year's session is about the inclusion and full participation of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations in the implementation of the convention. With us today is Georgi Panayotov, permanent representative of Bulgaria to the United Nations and president of the Conference of States Parties to the convention. Theresia Degener, chair of the CRPD committee. Catalina, Devandas, Aguilar, Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and Collin, chair of the International Disability Alliance. I'd like to start with the ambassador.
Yes, thank you very much. I just opened the 10th session of the Conference of the States Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. What is the convention? The convention is one of the most progressive human rights treaties that recognizes the role of the people whom it is trying to impact. Our main focus this year will be on ensuring inclusiveness and participation of the people with disabilities and their representative organization in the implementation of the convention. We would like to really ensure a truly inclusive conference because this conference brings together member states, organizations of persons with disabilities, donors, non-governmental organizations, national human rights institutions, and UN agencies, and would like to discuss better ways to implement the convention and to make sure that the persons with disabilities and their organization participate in all discussions, in all policy decisions related to the implementation of the convention. And now I don't want to take more of your time. I'd like to give the opportunity to my colleagues who have been engaged in the implementation of the convention for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Ms. Degener?
Ladies and gentlemen, the 10th Conference of State Parties to the CRPD is the beginning of the second decade of the CRPD. During the first decade, we have reached almost universal ratification. And in the second decade, we will have to finish the task of finishing universal ratification. And at the same time, all stakeholders must take effort to protect the normative standard set by the CRPD. It is of utmost importance to keep these standards, in particularly with regard to legal capacity, institutionalization, medical treatment, non-discrimination laws and policies, and inclusion and full participation of all persons with disabilities. The CRPD committee has now adopted 4 general comments in these areas in order to help state parties to implement the convention. The committee has also adopted statements in relation to humanitarian action and urban development. Our jurisprudence seeks to give guidance to state parties. The Geneva Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the New York Conference of State Parties are the 2 pillars of the international mechanism for implementing and monitoring the CRPD. As the chair of the CRPD committee, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the Bureau of the Conference of State Parties for collaborating with our committee and supporting us in our common goal to implement all human rights for all persons with disabilities. 3 challenges for the second decade lie ahead of us. 1, restoring gender balance in the committee. After the last election 2016, I am the only woman in the committee. This needs to be changed in the next election in 2018. Secondly, protecting the normative standard of the CRPD. The high normative standard of the CRPD must not be undermined by other legal human rights instruments. And thirdly, ensuring a human rights-based approach in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor now to Ms. Catalina Devandas Aguilar.
Thank you very much. The first thing I want to do is indeed in this opening of the Conference of State Parties, I would like to note the efforts made by the Bureau and by the chair to make sure that this conference is fully participatory of persons with disabilities. This is unprecedented, and we expect that this is going to be set as a precedent for the future, so that any Conference of State Parties in the future will also benefit from the direct participation of persons with disabilities at all its sessions. So I want to recognize that, because I think it's very innovative in the UN system to have that. The second thing, and as a special rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities, we are very concerned as part of the disability community, and as Madame Degener already said, and as well as the Mr. Ambassador, and I'm very sure that our colleague from the International Disability Alliance will also express the importance that we are giving to the need to have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as the guiding tool to implement the SDGs for persons with disabilities. We achieved I think it was a great success of the disability community to achieve several references to persons with disabilities and the SDGs, including a reference to have data disaggregated by disability. However, and this is my key message, I think, for this conference, we are struggling to get a clear recommendation from the UN system to move ahead with the data disaggregation by disability. We need a concrete recommendation coming from the UN system, and a specific from the UN Statistical Division to all the countries to say there is a methodology. The methodology is called the Washington Group set of questions that can be easily used in any data collection effort at national level to disaggregate data on persons with disabilities. And why is this important? Because without that data, without that baseline data, we are not going to be able to measure the impact of all these important tools with regards to persons with disabilities. So we have the SDGs, we have the convention, but if we don't have the data, we won't be able to say we are indeed making progress, we are advancing in the realization of persons with disabilities. And so I think that for me, one of the most important things that I want to discuss with states during this conference is how can we advance in making sure that the system recommends the use of this methodology to collect the data of persons with disabilities, making sure indeed that we will not leave persons with disabilities behind. 15 years ago, we were not part of the MDGs because of the lack of data. This time, we cannot accept that anymore. I thank you for the opportunity.
And now let's go to Collin, Chair of the International Disability Alliance.
Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be here this morning with you. And I think it's important that you're aware of our work. And our work specifically relates to people with disabilities in terms of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, i.e. the CRPD. And when I talk about people with disabilities, I mean globally. I think, as my colleagues have mentioned, they have talked about gender balance and the significance of that. Secondly, it's very important that women with disabilities and girls are recognised within the current situation of promoting and supporting both women and girls. And IDA, as the group of 14 different regional and global members, where we really want to ensure that all governments, state parties, are really aware of people with disabilities and that we have the skills and experience to work with you. We are ready and committed to working with you. And I think if we look at what happened yesterday at the Civil Society Forum in terms of Article 4.3 specifically, we really need you to understand our position. We want to work together, we are committed to that, and we want to ensure that people with disabilities are heard and, most importantly, involved so that we have meaningful participation and full inclusion. So when we say nothing about us without us, that's very significant. When we look at the last 10 years of the CRPD, we have made some amazing achievements. When we look to the next decade, we don't want to hear no when we ask to be involved. We are the experts and we see that we are critical in terms of participation over the next 10 years. In closing, I would like to thank the Bureau for organising the conference, and particularly under the leadership of the Bulgarian ambassador, and to see that really, finally, the member states are working with civil society, and we would like to see that ongoing for future COSP meetings. Again, thank you very much, Ambassador, for the opportunity and for particularly the fact that you're with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I'd like to open the floor to questions. Yes.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Waldo from Prensa Latina. On the 2030 agenda, what do you expect in terms of benefit for people with disabilities? And a follow-up on this question, almost 2 years after the adoption, do you have seen any concrete progress for people with disabilities? And to solicitarle si es posible hacer en español un comentario sobre qué situación tienen en la actualidad las personas con discapacidad y cuáles son los principales desafíos y las expectativas de esta comunidad. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll take the first part of your question, for I am not a Spanish speaker. So, you mentioned the 2030 agenda. The 2030 agenda obliges the member states to uphold the human rights of persons with disabilities in all development efforts. That's important to know. And to achieve that, and to deliver on that promise to leave no one behind, the implementation of the SDGs of the Sustainable Development Goals should lead to the full inclusion and empowerment of persons with disabilities. Long story short, inclusive development is the key to sustainable development. This is my answer to the first part of your question, and now I'll be happy to give the floor to Ms. Devandas Aguilar.
Reply in Spanish. Yeah, I will go directly to Spanish. Gracias por la pregunta. Creo que hay muchísimos desafíos para la comunidad de personas con discapacidad, aun si reconocemos que gracias a la convención las oportunidades se han incrementado exponencialmente, las oportunidades para mejorar. El principal desafío para mí es que los estados integren en sus políticas de manera transversal las necesidades de las personas con discapacidad, y para eso la Agenda de Desarrollo Sostenible es fundamental. ¿Cuáles son para mí las necesidades básicas? Los estados no están mirando en cómo hacer sus sistemas de protección social accesibles e inclusivos para las personas con discapacidad, y sin eso no vamos a lograr la igualdad ni la participación, porque es el elemento base fundamental para avanzar. Y eso está mandado tanto por la Convención como por la Agenda de Desarrollo Sostenible, que para nosotros, y como lo dijo el embajador, son dos herramientas que están totalmente vinculadas. O sea, no se puede implementar una Agenda de Desarrollo Sostenible sin mirar a la Convención de los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad, y de la otra manera también. Creo que son dos herramientas muy ricas. Hay muchísimos desafíos porque las personas con discapacidad permanecen ausentes de las discusiones, y por eso estamos celebrando tanto el hecho de que gracias a la presidencia de Bulgaria nosotros tenemos la posibilidad de tener una participación tan fuerte en esta conferencia. Pero para mí, ojalá que dentro de 10 años yo le pudiera decir, mire, las personas con discapacidad estamos participando plenamente de la UN. ¿Cuántas sesiones, usted que es aquí periodista, ¿cuántas sesiones de Naciones Unidas son inclusivas para las personas sordas, por ejemplo? Todavía falta muchísimo. Gracias.
Other questions? No? Any other questions? Well, in that case, I will conclude the press conference. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you to our panelists.